Lara, do you want to introduce yourself quickly? Um, I can't find you. There you are. Hi.
Hi.
Do you want to just tell us a wee bit about yourself? For a second.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, everyone. My name's Lara Buchanan, and I was actually in Northern Ireland in August. I came over for a wedding, which is so exciting. It was the first wedding post-lockdown, so it was a huge celebration. Actually, it was at Ballymena Castle. Is that right? Yeah. No, you know what? I'm just gonna stop. I think I've got the wrong name there. Anyway, it was lovely. Gareth knows where it was, and it was lovely, and I had a wonderful time in Northern Ireland. Should have thought about that. Sorry, before I came on the call. But it was really wonderful. Although right now I've come back to visit my family in South Africa, so I'm in a very sunny South Africa, which is great. And yeah, I grew up here in Cape Town, and but moved over to the UK about 11 years ago now, and I've been living in Oxford for 9 of those years. Lived in London initially. I was a high school teacher. I taught history for 4 years after university, and then since then I went and studied theology at Oxford, and then have kind of been in the world of theology ever since then. But the kind of theology that we're actually doing today, which is really what I'm fascinated by, which is thinking about the questions of faith in light of just life and questions of life that we all have across the world, no matter what creed or religious background we come from, or no religious background. So really kind of connecting as humans over the big questions, and then thinking about what Christianity has to say about that. So I'm working in a job similarly to Gareth, an organization that spends time thinking about helping believers to think, and perhaps asking thinkers whether they would also think about belief. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. Gareth and Amy used to live in Oxford, and I'm really sad that Northern Ireland has stolen them back, but I'll forgive you.
We're so thankful for that you're here, and yeah, I'm so excited that you're like from all the way from South Africa as well. So good. Is it okay if we so the Slido code is in the link, and if you go onto slido.com and if you just type in the Slido code for this event is human. So if you just type in human, you can ask any questions you want anonymously, and Gareth and Lara will both be there at the end to answer those questions. So anything at all, just fire it in. So that'll be open the whole time that Lara is speaking. So if there's anything that comes up or you think about, feel free to ask it. And these are the people that ask. They're very wise, and yeah. I'm so excited to hear what you're going to say, Lara. This is such a big question. Is the Bible sexist? It's such a controversial question as well. So is it okay if I hand over to you now, Lara, and that you can speak to us now?
Yeah, absolutely. And so shall I just go for it? And then I know we're going to stop at 22 for our time for Q&A. Great. Well, yeah, thank you again so much to all of you guys at Stranmillis for inviting me. And as Kate was saying, the whole purpose of this week, and what Gareth and I know are both so passionate about, is this whole thing of asking questions, and asking questions specifically around the Christian faith. As people who I know, Gareth and I both grew up in Christian homes. We have gone on journeys ourselves, and I'm sure Gareth will share about the journey that he's gone on, and I'll share a little bit about the journey I've gone on, which has included many, many ups and downs and many, many times of questions. But I think what has been so exciting to me about events like this, and about what I've discovered as I've asked my questions about the Christian faith, is that the Christian faith itself invites our questions, and all the way through the Bible there is a real premium put on us being totally real. And today I was being asked to talk about a question that was probably in my top 2 questions for myself as a teenager, as I grew up having kind of been introduced to the Christian faith, and I would say also having already begun to experience something of faith in prayer, and as I would read especially about Jesus. As a teenager, though, 2 big questions came to my mind. I won't speak about the other one now, but the second one was this question, was the question of, is the Bible sexist? This really cut straight to my heart. And the reason it was cutting to my heart was because on some deep level, I felt that I was experiencing inside myself something of not being equally valued, and I was aware I was living in a society. I said I grew up in South Africa, so South Africa is known to have been a society that, despite being claiming that it was based on Christian values, didn't see all human beings as equal. That's something that's obviously been talked about a lot in the last 20 years post-apartheid. But that deep intrinsic belief that all people are intrinsically equal wasn't something that actually was lived out in this country. And as a woman, I would say that the society was quite patriarchal in many ways. And even though people wouldn't necessarily say that explicitly, it was something I just felt. I just felt that I was of less value. I just remember looking around and thinking that I just felt my opinion mattered less. I felt that I was probably less able to do a good job. No one was saying these things. In fact, they were usually just saying the opposite. And yes, it was something that I was experiencing inside myself. And then I remember that reading certain passages in the Bible. There are 3 in particular that I found really tough. And I'm not going to focus in on those ones actually, because I think we might leave that for the Q&A if those are of interest, because I really want to focus on something else that really helped me. But I remember reading those passages and almost being too scared to read them, like flipping over them, because I didn't want to engage with even to think about what they might be saying, because I was so scared. And the fear deep down in me was, what if it's true? What if it's true that firstly there is a God, and that God doesn't value me equally? And that fear was so real in me, and yet it was something that I realized I couldn't run from. It was something I needed to think about, and alongside a whole host of other questions of how we can know what's true, and if anything's true, and why should we even trust the Bible. All these sorts of questions were ones I realized I have to grapple with. Christianity is claiming that it's true and it's based on truth, and so I can't say that I want to believe it and then actually hide from all sorts of questions. So hopefully by way of introduction, this question was really significant for me in a very deep and personal way. But I realized it was alongside all other questions that came to my mind, something that if I wanted to engage with Christianity, I was going to have to engage with this question. And I wonder if any of you on this call have had questions like either like this or other questions. And I want to start off this entire week by just saying that that your questions within Christianity are so significant, and they really matter. And whether or not Gareth and I have answers this week, that doesn't mean that the question isn't incredibly important. And the truth is, if Christianity is true, then ultimately there will be answers. There'll be accumulation of answers that begin to make sense. And if it's not true, then that's something that needs to be discovered. That's a journey I've gone on. I know it's a journey Gareth's gone on, and it's a journey I would encourage everyone to go on, whether they are someone of faith or not. I really believe that truth matters, and specifically this question of who God is, and if the God of the Bible is true, what that God is like. These questions matter so much. So jumping now to this question, if the question was, does the Bible contain sexism? Then the answer would have to be yes, as a comprehensive and illuminating narrative, I think, of the human condition. The Bible contains many stories of some pretty horrific things: incest, child sacrifice, drunken orgies, murder, infanticide, fratricide, basically all the sides. And sexism is not in the least excluded from this list. We see sexism in the Bible many times. So if we want to know is sexism in the Bible, then absolutely it is there. We read about it. But I think the question I've been asked today is the Bible sexist? And I think at the heart of that question is this question, the one I said I was dealing with as a teenager and have spent many years processing, just even on an emotional level. What is the God of the Bible like? Is the God of the Bible sexist? And this is a really important question, because I think all of us can agree that religion has often been used as a tool to support discrimination, including discrimination against women. But I want to think about today, what does the Bible really say on this issue? Firstly, just two things. The Bible isn't a how-to textbook. I don't know if all of you have read the Bible, or I'm guessing in our culture, most of us have read bits of it. But if you read it, you realize it's not a list of things that we shouldn't do. The Bible, as I said, is a faithful narrative of human history, and therefore includes a whole bunch of messy things, because human beings and humanity is messy. Just because something is described in the Bible doesn't mean that it's prescribed by the Bible. Everything that we see and we read happening in the Bible is not condoned by the God of the Bible. That's very clear, and any theologians will tell you that. The second thing I want to quickly say is that it is also possible for us, very easy for us, to misinterpret the true meaning of certain texts. And this is true for any text, as someone who studied and taught history. Different cultural, and we have to take into consideration different cultural and historical gaps between us and the text that we're reading. And that's definitely true of the ancient Near East. Just a quick little example of this. So when I first moved over to the UK, I came over as a supply teacher, like basically every other South African, or Australian. And I remember the first ever teaching job that I had, interview that I had it was with a teaching agency for supply teaching. I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience, but basically the more nervous you are, the more your brain says really weird things. Like in a normal context, you just say normal things. And then when you're really trying to be impressive, suddenly that's when your brain decides to just like misfire and start saying all sorts of strange things. Anyway, this happened to me in my first ever job interview when, I don't know, and just a heads up in case you've never been in a job interview, they always ask you at the end, do you have any questions for us? And this is a really good thing to know, because I did not know that they were going to ask me that. So I didn't have any prepared questions that made me look really cool and thoughtful. So I blanked. And of course, under pressure, what came to me in the moment was a question about dress code. Don't know why, but then not only did a bizarre question come to my mind of all the questions that I could have asked, the way I phrased it was really strange. And because I'm a South African, it came out in an even more strange way. The question I asked in a British translation is, what sort of trousers should I wear? If you know anything about South African or American English, you'll know that we don't use the word trousers, we use the word pants. Anyway, so I ended up essentially asking about underwear choice in the first ever job interview that I had. And as I said it, suddenly like this cultural back in my mind, I remembered that there was a different word, and I went bright red, and it was basically a disaster. Anyway, all of that to say, I hope if nothing else from this talk, you come away feeling like if you have a terrible first job interview, you're not alone. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that was a huge cultural misunderstanding. Thankfully, they realized it and didn't think I was a really strange person. I still got the job. But that was in the same century, within cultures that are pretty similar, the Western culture. We even speak the same language, and yet there was such a huge misunderstanding. Now, we know that centuries are back, a completely different culture, different languages that are being interpreted. We're going to have to do a little bit of study to make sure that we don't misunderstand. And actually, that is just a little point to say. I'm not going to be able to go into all of it. Hopefully, we will in some Q&A. But please follow up with us if you have questions on this, because my experience has been the more I study the Bible, especially parts that on the face of things seem, when I read something, I think that seems shocking. It's a little note to say, actually, when that happens, pause, because often we are misreading the text. And I don't want to use that as a kind of like, well, everything's just, can be interpreted in the way I want it to be. More, I mean that in a genuine, after 10 years of theological study, kind of been fascinated to find out how much sense the Bible makes when I actually understand the context of what's being said. So that's a little aside. But I want to say at this point as well that I don't want to push any questions aside, because this is such an important question, because it does cut straight to the heart of our values, and it cuts straight to the heart of who we believe God is, and what kind of and what that God therefore then sanctions amongst humanity. And if you are on this call and you have in any way experienced mistreatment, whether that's because of your gender or because of any other metric upon which you've been graded or looked down upon, I want to say that I really recognize that for you, for me, this has been a really, really significant question, and it really matters what we say about it. I want to do two things to try and just give you, in the time I have left, how I have come. And obviously this is very short, and I would say this has been one of the questions of the last 10 years I've spent the most time on, so there's a lot to say. But in the short time we have, I just want to do two things. I want to zoom out in terms of what I believe the Bible's saying as a whole in its narrative, and I want to zoom in. I want to zoom in on Jesus, and I'll explain why when I do that. But firstly, to zoom out, the Bible gives us a picture of God creating a world that is beautiful, a world that he says is good, a world where without any of what the Bible terms sin and wrongdoing. And sin is essentially the best definition in Christian theology of sin is a breaking of relationship with God, a right and good and healthy relationship to God. And as that break happens, that fragmentation, that fracturing of that relationship, alongside it comes a fracturing and a fragmentation of our relationship with ourselves and our identity and understanding our identity, our relationship with the earth, with this beautiful world that we were given to live in and to steward, and our relationship with one another as human beings. That is the kind of best definition of sin. It's like a breaking with God that results in all of these other fracturings that happen. But the Bible says before that happened, which is documented in Genesis chapter 3, we're first given a beautiful world with things just as it should be. And I just want to speak to what that world displays in terms of God's idea for man and woman. In Genesis 1:27, we're told that God made male and female in his image. In his image, he made them. Both male and female, we're told, are co-image bearers of God, that together they image God. It's not that men image God and then women just kind of come along as a sideshow. That together, there's something of even the difference, the maleness and the femaleness, but their unity and as one of the same kind, the same species, that unity and diversity is something that reflects who God is. And the Bible speaks of God as Trinity, unity, diversity in unity, three separate beings, persons of the Godhead, as it's termed in Christian theology, but all completely united in essence, in their godness, and that human beings in that way image God, and so they are equally important in that. And interestingly, if we compare narratives from other ancient Near East kind of creation accounts, like the Egyptian one, for instance, it's interesting that only the Egyptians are in that narrative are said to be reflecting God and the Creator, and everyone else that's created is sort of the enemies of God. It's interesting that the Bible in Genesis says absolutely from the start that all human beings, every single human being is created in the image of God, and that's what separates humanity from the rest of creation, sets it apart as in this unique way. Not only that, but then the mandate is given to both male and female to go and have stewardship, to go and rule the earth. So male and female together are called to co-rulership. So it's a leadership of the earth. And obviously in Christianity, leadership is servanthood, so it's to serve the earth as well, to make sure that we, a little punt for making sure that we care for the earth. That is absolutely right at the beginning of Genesis. So right at the beginning, before anything goes wrong, male and female together, co-imaging God and also co-ruling together, in their togetherness, being in charge in a beautiful servant-hearted way. Genesis 3, that's when the fracturing comes in, and that's when all sorts of divisions start to happen. Division, a problem of identity and shame in and of ourselves, a problem with our sexuality, shame coming into the sexuality within male and female, and then shame working its way out through problems within the family, to international and inter-ethnic conflict and problems. And the rest of the Bible's in that context of problems and of deep relational complex problems, part of our free volition, that God has endowed us with, that is so also so sacred. Our freedom to choose creates, based off of what we choose, all of these problems. And the rest of the Bible is God navigating us in our freedom to choose how we want to live, but in the context of that mess. And then we have, right at the end of the Bible, so I'm sort of zooming out the big picture, a picture of when God promises, and you may not know this, but the God of the Bible promises that there's going to be a day when everything is made right, when there is no more sorrow, no more brokenness, no more evil, no more suffering. There's a beautiful picture right at the end of the Bible, written by John, the author of the book Revelation, the last book of the Bible, Revelation chapter 21, which speaks of this new Jerusalem, which is an image for the new place where God is going to dwell with humanity, and where all evil will be banished. And in this image, we're given this beautiful picture of all people together in complete equality before God's throne. No people being privileged above others, but all people together. This joyful picture of a celebration, of a wedding feast is the image that it's given. And they are all co-inheritors of this kingdom. It's interesting because John would have been writing this. John, we know, would have come out of an era where, in the current time in Jerusalem, in the temple period, that women, for example, would have been separated from men, and based off of other divisions in society, certain people would have been kept out of certain parts of the temple. And John pictures a new Jerusalem, a heavenly Jerusalem, where, when all things are made right, when all things are as they should be, according to God's vision, there is complete equality, people of every tribe and tongue and nation before the Lord, co-inheritors, and women are completely in that. Okay, so that is a zoomed out picture of what the Bible tells us about equality. And I want to say that this is so important to me as a Christian, that I have a fundamental reason to say that every single human life is of equal value, no matter what their creed, no matter whether they hate me, disagree with me, think that I am not of equal value. I can never, because of what the Bible tells me, ever look at even people who see me as an enemy and think that they have less value based off of any metric. That is so, I'm so passionate about that, and I feel so excited about that vision that the Bible gives us. But I want to end by zooming in on Jesus. The reason I want to do that is because the Bible tells us, both in the book of Colossians and the book of Hebrews and in many other places, that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. The Christians believe that Jesus is God come to earth, showing us in human flesh what the God, the creator of this universe, is like. That we can actually see, we can watch his life, and we can have confidence that God isn't just some kind of projection in our mind, that we don't get to sort of ascribe qualities that we think God should have to him based off of what our cultural preferences are. God has come to us and told us who he is. And the Bible says that's Jesus, that he is the image of the invisible God, that he is the perfect representation of God. And I once heard a preacher say, there is no God in heaven who is not like Jesus Christ. If you've ever had a picture of God as a misogynist, or as God as a power-hungry kind of macho kind of headmaster in the sky who's going to try and kind of make you feel bad about yourself, I guess I'd really ask you to say, would you read about Jesus? Obviously, this question is going to come in your mind. Well, how do you know? Why should I trust that Jesus is the image of the invisible God? And I'm sure that's going to come up. And that's a really important question, probably the most important question in this coming week. But if that's true, if that is what he's like, then I just ask you to compare that image of God, maybe that scary image that we can often have in our minds because of maybe authority figures that we've experienced in this world, and compare it with Jesus, because we're told that Jesus is exactly what the creator of this universe is like, exactly what the creator of you and me is like. So I want to just end by doing that. What is Jesus like? Well, I just want to say a few things about the Jesus that I know and the Jesus that we see in the Bible. Very quickly, in the culture as well, that Jesus was living in. We think of the Old Testament as maybe quite a time that was quite oppressive towards women, and it was. But the Greek culture that Jesus was in was even worse. It was even in the run up to the few centuries running up to Jesus' birth. We see there was such a low view of women. They were seen as mentally, morally weaker than men in the Greek culture, and were more likely to succumb to sexual temptation, and they were going to lead men astray. Women were often kind of relegated to kind of the home and not really allowed out in public, into public discourse at all. They weren't seen as trustworthy. As I said, they seemed to have lesser mental capacities. Basically, they were excluded from political, public, and religious life in most contexts in the Greek culture. And that Greek culture, that kind of Hellenization, had really seeped into the culture of the Jewish culture into which Jesus comes. So women are really not in a good place. They're not being educated at this point, and they're not being given the opportunity to study or teach the Torah at all. A famous Jewish historian, Josephus, writes, the woman, says the law, is in all things inferior to the man. So the Jewish culture was also saying this very clearly at the time. It was a culture, in fact, daily the Jewish men would pray this prayer: praise be to God that he has not created me a Gentile. Praise be to God that he has not created me a woman. Praise be to God that he has not created me an ignorant man. So these, as you can see, a very kind of hierarchical and superior mindset. This is where the context into which Jesus comes. I want to start with saying one thing that's really fascinating. Genealogies in Jewish culture at the time were patrilineal primarily, which means that they trace the descent through the father's line, not the mother's. Straight away, the beginning of Matthew's gospel, we have it's like a little scoop into who Jesus is going to be like. For his 4 women make it into Jesus' genealogy, which is a kind of a shock and outrageous. But not only that, at the time is that shocking and outrageous, but who these women were would have been a real shock and outrage to have put them in such a prominent position right at the beginning of the story of Jesus' life. Rahab, she was a foreigner, she wasn't Jewish. Not only that, she was a prostitute, so she'd been seen as a wayward woman. She's put there as a grandmother of Jesus. Next, Ruth, another foreigner, is put there. Then Tamar, someone who again was said to have sinned, but actually she was in such a terrible position, and yet she's put in there. And then Bathsheba, also a woman who was terribly mistreated by King David, probably one of the top figures in Jewish history. These women are given pride of place. And this gives us a little insight into Jesus. But I just want to say 3 things about Jesus that is incredible to me. Firstly, Jesus was friends with women, and he honored them when the religious leaders around him were shocked by it, and they would never do such a thing themselves. He doesn't primarily see them as unclean or seductive in the way that was the primary view of women. He in fact sees them as people who are trustworthy, people who he can have a close friendship with, something that even today I would say in many religious settings people can kind of be really jumpy about. And so let's just think about Luke chapter 7 verse 38. You can feel free to write these down if you want to go look up them later. A woman comes and expresses before Jesus a brokenheartedness that is expressed in a closeness towards him, and we're told that his disciples are shocked and ashamed, and Jesus welcomes her and says that what she is expressing is beautiful, and he's not ashamed of it. John chapter 11, Jesus spent time with Mary and Martha, as well as their brother Lazarus, and we're told that they're close friends of his. Certain laws at the time were turned into ways of segregating women, and Jesus shows that the spirit of the law honors women. 3 examples of that: Mark 5, he affirms the woman who touches him in the hope of healing. Again, he's not afraid or scared of women in the way that the culture was and the religious men of the day were, and also to do with the Levitical laws of cleanliness, which would have said a woman should be kept separate when she's on her period. Jesus welcomes her, and he doesn't shun her where the law would have said he should have at that time. He also goes on to touch a dead girl. Whatever you believe about miracles, the Bible says that he heals her and brings her back to life. Again, breaking a Levitical law, in order to show that this girl, this young girl, is more important than those, and the spirit of the law says that she is more important than the letter of the law. Luke chapter 15, again, we're told Jesus heals a woman on the Sabbath who'd suffered for 18 years. He answers the objections to this by calling her a daughter of Abraham. And this was a very common Jewish phrase, which Jewish men would have known was denoting God's favor. Teachers like Philo and Ben Sira of Jerusalem blamed women for their evil allure. Ben Sira of Jerusalem says this: "Turn away your eyes from a shapely woman. Do not gaze at beauty belonging to another. Many have are seduced by a woman's beauty, and by it passion is kindled like a fire. And in blood you may be plunged into destruction," basically because of the dangers of women's allure and how dangerous they are. Jesus turns this on its head in Matthew 5, where he doesn't put the blame on women for an adulterous or kind of lust of men. He doesn't say, well, women are just intrinsically dangerous and therefore it's understandable a man should lust after them, therefore women should be hidden. Jesus turns that around, and he would have been shocking. He says that it's if your eye, he puts the responsibility on the person who is lusting. And he says, if your eye causes you to lust, then you should, in his like dramatic language, it's a hyperbole, but he says, gouge it out. He turns around the blame or the responsibility in an amazing way. These are things that maybe, because of the context that we don't know, we don't always see how shocking they would have been. But a few more things that have really amazed me as I've gone through. And sorry, I've just realized my battery's low, which I should have had it plugged in. Anyway, I'll see. I think it's going to last me, and I'll quickly plug it in at the end. Jesus taught from the world of women. He always included women in his examples, but again, not something I'd noticed. But for example, when he was making the point about when he says in Matthew chapter 9, verse 16 and 17 about new wine, he talks about new wine, and he talks from the world of men that you wouldn't pour new wine into old wineskins. Winemaking was the industry of men. He then makes the same point, but using an example from the world of women, and he says, similarly, you wouldn't take a piece of unshrunk clothing and sew it onto a garment. So he's including women to make his point. He does this again in Matthew chapter 5, verse 14, when he talks about the light inside you when Christ and the Holy Spirit has filled your heart. And he says that to the world of men, he says, if you're lighting a lamp on the city wall, you wouldn't cover it. And then he turns to the world of women, and he says, because men would have done that job, but women would have done the job of lighting lamps in the home. And he says, similarly, if you're lighting a lamp in the home, you wouldn't put it under a bowl. And then take Luke 15, the famous parable of the lost sheep. Men were shepherds, but then he goes and makes the same point, saying, in terms of how God goes after just the one who's lost. He then turns to the world of women and says similarly, and he talks about a woman who's searching for a coin that's got lost on her hands and knees. And he's talking about both from the world of men and the world of women, teaching about God's love for anyone who's lost, anyone who's been separated out and who needs help and needs saving. But he uses the world of men and women. I know there are many questions, and I need to finish now, but I just want to also say that when it comes to female disciples, yes, Jesus didn't have any female disciples in his official group, and we can talk about how Jesus was working within the context that he was in, but it's really important to know that he was shockingly countercultural. Let's look at the example of Matthew 12:45. Jesus points to a crowd, which he calls his disciples. So his disciples, the ones who he's training up, and he says, these are my mother and my brothers. And we know that culturally a man would never turn to a group that included a group of men and women and refer to them to just a group of men and refer to them in the female. So we know that he referred to the group to his disciples as a group that included women. That's definitely clear from the cultural analysis of the text. Luke chapter 10 verse 38, we're told that Mary sat at the feet of Jesus. This is an official phrase which denotes a rabbi and his disciple. The exact same phrases used of the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament, and his relationship with his rabbi Gamaliel in Acts chapter 2 verse 3. And Jesus strongly affirms Mary's choice not to just go and do the work in the kitchen, which culturally would have been the expectation, which her sister Martha is shocked by the fact that she isn't doing that, probably by the taboos that Mary is breaking. Jesus affirms her role and her place as a disciple, learning from him. And we also know that in that culture, disciples learned in order to teach, which is interesting. I'm not going to have time to talk about the early church and how women were deacons. Phoebe, for example, being called a diaconon, which is the exact same term that's used of Timothy and Paul in their ministries. But I just want to end by saying these three things, and then we can come to all those things in the Q&A. So I've gone 3 minutes over, but I just want to end with these three things. Women are intrinsic in the three major moments in the New Testament. Firstly, the incarnation. We wouldn't know anything about the incarnation if it wasn't for Mary. We know Luke went and interviewed her, and that's how we have the whole Magnificat and the whole story of the incarnation in Luke chapter 1. And God involves women. He could have just pitched up on earth, but instead he involves women in that deeply female process of gestation and of pregnancy and of giving birth. A woman is intrinsic to the incarnation. Then the cross, Mark chapter 15, verse 40, we're told that the male disciples abandoned Jesus, but the women stayed. And therefore, we probably know what happened at the cross because of the women. The women were at the cross. And then lastly, the resurrection. Matthew chapter 28, verses 1 to 2. Jesus appears first to the women, entrusting them as the first witnesses, the first to preach, the first to tell the truth of the fact that Jesus, and I alluded earlier to the importance of the question of who Jesus is. Well, it's women who say, we saw him. Often women's testimony is not trusted, but in the Bible, it's the testimony of women, even in a culture where women in a court of law, their testimony didn't even hold up because it didn't count as equal to a man. The Bible affirms, and the male disciples who write the gospel accounts affirm that it's women who are the first ever to give testimony to that Jesus is alive, that death didn't hold him, which is the whole argument for why he is God incarnate and not just a human man. I want to finally end with this quote. It's, to me, beautiful. Quote of Dorothy L. Sayers, a woman who was in her own right a real trailblazer in Oxford, a friend of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, but struggled with her own experiences as a woman at Oxford. But she says this beautiful thing about Jesus. Sorry, I've just quickly realized I scrolled past it. She says this: perhaps it is no wonder that women were first at the cradle and last at the cross. They had never known a man like this man. There has never been such another. A prophet and a teacher who never nagged at them, never flattered or coaxed or patronized, who never made arch jokes about them, never treated them as either the women, God help us, or the ladies, God bless them, who rebuked without querulousness and praised without condescension, who took their questions and arguments seriously, who never mapped out their sphere for them, never urged them to be feminine or jeered at them for being female, who had no axe to grind and no uneasy male dignity to defend, who took them as he found them and was completely unself-conscious. There is no act, no sermon, no parable in the whole gospel that borrows its pungency from female perversity. Nobody could possibly guess from the words or deeds of Jesus that there was anything funny about the nature of women. There's a little story in the Old Testament about a woman who was mistreated by one of potentially the greatest Jewish character in the Old Testament, Abraham, the father of the Israelite people. And he mistreats her because she has little value, she has less social value, and she's a woman. It's interesting that in the narrative, the Bible follows God following this woman, Hagar. She's been cast out, after being abused and mistreated. And then with God following her and seeking her out, the Bible then records her saying, now my eyes have seen the one who sees me. In the context of all the mistreatment that we give to one another, that the Bible records us giving to one another, even the most lauded and praised religious leaders, God himself follows the one who's been oppressed and been mistreated. I wonder if you, having heard all of this, and I need to end, as I've been speaking about Jesus and about the whole narrative of the Bible, have found that your heart in listening to this is longing to know the one who sees you, when maybe even religious leaders or other authorities in life or just culture hasn't valued you for whatever reason, are longing to know the one who sees you. And I want to ask you today, if you've never prayed and asked that God for you to know him, if you would consider doing that. It's been the most amazing thing of my life. And if you have questions, we're going to do that now, but I just want to end by inviting you, if you've never done that, to give it a try. The Bible says really clearly that if anyone asks for God to come and meet with them, he promises that he will. So I'm going to end there and hand back to Kate. Sorry for going a bit over time.
No problem at all, Lara. That was so great. Thank you so much. And that was so helpful. There's a couple of questions Jasmine,
I'm going to grab my charger. Sorry about that.
that
Gareth, you can ask the first one.
was a good move there.
Yeah.
You've done that before, Lara.
Jasmine's going to share the screen here so we can maybe see them. So there's one that's got the most popular one here is many Christian denominations don't allow women to be preachers, ministers, and pastors, etc. Why is it that many women like Lara are clearly skilled communicators? A compliment there, Lara.
Oh, thanks. I feel like I should let Gareth say.
Yes, Lara.
Sorry, what was that? I didn't hear.
I think you should definitely take this one.
Oh, really? Okay. Right. So many Christians don't allow women to be preachers, ministers. Yeah. And I realized I didn't go into that at all. And so I'm sorry. I hope if you're someone on this call and you're like, yes, but I want you to talk about 1 Timothy 2 and 1 Corinthians 11 and 1 Corinthians 14 and all these things. And I'm so sorry that we didn't get into those details. The reason I kind of wanted to use the time I had to just focus is because as I said, the Bible, Bible takes interpretation, and that can sometimes be even just that fact is, I think, something difficult for us as Christians to grapple with. But in my understanding, clearly, God, if you are someone who believes that the Word of God is inspired and that it's written by people, but inspired through the Holy Spirit, then we actually have to grapple with the reality that it's an interesting kind of mixture of story, of history, of poetry, and there's something about it. It's not, as I said, a list of how to, and just these are all the things you have to do. And it's fascinating to me because that shows me that God doesn't want people who are just going to read a list of do's and don'ts and be like, great, thanks for that. I can go off now and live my life exactly doing the right thing and being sure I'm right. God's not interested in that. The God of the Bible is interested in relationship. And I actually think that's partly why he's written the book as he's allowed it to be written as it is, which is a bunch of incredible stories throughout history of his interaction with the people of that time. And actually it takes us caring and really wanting to know what that says about him to understand his heart. And interestingly, I think Jesus portrays this as well, and that all the time religious leaders are coming to Jesus saying, well, the law says this, the law says that. And Jesus' response is always, where's your heart? You can read the law and know it all perfectly, but where's your heart? And I think for that reason, I wanted to give the overarching understanding of what I think the Bible's trying to communicate to us, because within that, we do have these texts that take interpretation. And again, the question is, where is our heart as we read them? The texts that talk about women not preaching, there are different understandings of that, but I think no Christian can read the whole narrative of the Bible and come away thinking that women are in any way, or any human being, because of the whole arch of the book, is in any way inferior or in any way to be discriminated against. That is at the root of how God has created us and tells us to interact with each other. But the Bible does say that there are, in certain contexts, we may be called to maybe submit authority to certain people for the sake of honoring each other. And that is what a lot of theologians think is going on in those passages, that there are specific contexts in which, for example, if you look at Ephesus, if you know anything about the Ephesian culture, there was basically the goddess Artemis dominated. There was this enormous kind of like a temple to the goddess Artemis with hundreds and hundreds of kind of like slaves, essentially, women completely dominating the whole city. Was a kind of a female dominated city in many ways, and men, if they had to do anything, had to be castrated and in order to even serve at the lowest level of this temple. And it seems that in that context, in the book of Ephesians, and when 1 Timothy is written to the church in Ephesus, they are being asked, there's obviously there's something where the women are kind of dominating and being and these are women who are just come into the church and they don't know anything about Jesus. And Paul is saying, if they want to come and learn, they need to not dominate the men. The word that's used there is very clear that it's a kind of a domination that they're obviously taking over. And he's saying, I don't permit that culture of Ephesus isn't what this culture of the church is like. And so if anyone's dominating or being in any way like that, that's not of Christ, and that's not what Christianity is about. So there's lots more that could be said about those verses, but I think they have often been used in a way to do what we I think is obvious in all parts of the world, our inclination is to have primacy and dominance. All of us. No one can be excluded from that. Even just think about yourself in primary school. There's a temptation to kind of be part of the cool group and exclude others. We all do it. And the message of the gospel is that none of us should do that. So the church is in many ways has there have been so many ways in which the church itself has discriminated against women. But what I love about the gospel is that every time it's the gospel itself that critiques the church. So I grew up in South Africa, which is a Christian nation supposedly, and actually we could point to the Bible itself to tell us why it was wrong, deeply wrong, to mistreat and discriminate against people based off of their skin color. I'll stop there. Sorry, that was a long answer. Gareth, I'm sorry, I'll let you answer the next few.
That was great, Lara, thank you. So the next one we have is if the Bible isn't sexist, how did God allow concubines, etc.?
Yeah, really good question. And I think this goes back to really what Lara was saying at the beginning about the things that the Bible talks about and the Bible presents, and also then that the things that the Bible promotes. So there's a big difference between the things that the Bible presents and the things that the Bible promotes. There's a difference between the stuff that the Bible describes and the stuff that the Bible prescribes, for human beings. Now, if we're talking about human this week, and if the Bible is claiming to be from God, then there's no one else who ought to understand human reality better than God. And so we should expect that the Bible talks about real life and real situations, both the good stuff and the bad stuff. And it does do that. So the Bible does talk about even some heroes of the faith who get involved with concubines, others who get involved with multiple wives and things like that. And although the Bible talks about these things, I don't think in any place that the Bible talks about it will you see those being promoted as a good thing. Very often the Bible will talk about the story of people who got involved either with concubines like King Solomon or others, or the figure of Judah in the latter chapters of the book of Genesis, who was a brother of Joseph, or the likes of Jacob and others who ended up with multiple wives. The Bible never promotes that as an ideal. In fact, what it often shows is how when people's hearts get away from God and they begin to objectify women and idolize sex and romance and things like that, this is where it gets to, and it causes all kinds of chaos. So although the Bible talks about this stuff, it never prescribes it as an ideal. The ideal in that sense is the early chapters of Genesis, male and female, equal value and dignity, because they're made in the image of God. And then also this sense that although the Bible does talk about even people who otherwise might be described as having a heart after God or being the wisest person that ever lived, or a paradigm of what it means to have faith like Abraham, even in these other areas, they're really, really strong. In this area, they're mixed. I think what's really important is the Bible never excuses them. So it's never like, oh, they've got like credit in the bank, so how they treat women doesn't matter. It never does that. God holds them accountable and shows them the mess that they make and doesn't protect them from that mess. And then also, I think what we saw even with the example of Hagar, who in a sense was a kind of concubine. She was, a female slave, but treated in some ways like a concubine would be. What we also see is that God not only doesn't excuse the abuse of men, but he also protects and engages and sees the damaged women. And so I think in that sense, like God is, the Bible's not sexist in that regard. The Bible is affirming women. It's being very real and helping us understand about the mistakes that we often make in terms of valuing one another. But at the same time, even when we damage one another through our bad ideas and our selfish preferences, God takes that seriously and we're morally accountable. But God is also engaged with the victims in this story.
That's great, Gareth. Thank you. Thank you so much for these answers. The next one we have is do you think the Bible is outdated? So Gareth or Lara, whoever wants to take this.
Let me just say, like, one thing about this. I absolutely don't believe the Bible's outdated. Now, that's not to say that we're not dealing with an ancient text. I mean, the Bible, even the most recent parts of the Bible, are 2,000-year-old texts. So we are dealing with ancient literature. But at the same time, as much as when the Bible was first written was a long time ago, let's not fall into what C.S. Lewis called chronological snobbery. In other words, that simply because something's more recent and simply because something's newer, it's thereby better, it's thereby on the right side of history, it thereby says better things. Morality and ethics and doing what is right is not determined by time, and getting better ethically is not necessarily inevitable through the passage of time. It really depends on what the influences and the stories and the worldviews are that are informing those ethics. And very often what you'll find is that no matter where we land in terms of how we ought to live, very often we draw from the wells of ancient sources. So, although we're big on science, and science is a new enterprise in terms of the scope of human history, science can't speak into these areas of human value. It just doesn't have the capacity. It's outside its area. And so often when we ask the question, well, how do we use science? What should we pursue science for? What are the right ways? Even when it comes to questions of a vaccine, how should we allocate it? Who should get it first? How should we treat people? What are the factors in terms of the effect of lockdown on people? Is it only about the science? All those things we have to draw from other sources, and often those are philosophical sources, and often those are sources of worldview and ethics. And very often, even though we don't cite them, often we're going back to ancient literature and brilliant thinkers of the past in order to do that. And most of us wouldn't say that those things are outdated. So the question really comes down to, regardless of when this book came about, regardless of how long it's been around, are these things true? Does this resonate with human experience? Not necessarily my particular human experience in the 21st century in Belfast at my particular moment in time, but in the broader sense of what does it mean to be human? What do we really need in order to live well? Those deeper principles that we talk about, that when we say getting down to the heart level, the things that everybody needs, the things that everybody experiences, freedom and love and meaning and value. And then compare those sources and say, what makes the most sense of these things? And regardless of whether it's new or whether it's old, the real question is whatever makes the most sense is the one that rings true. And so we ought to take it seriously. And I personally think that if we look carefully at the Bible, and we'll talk a little bit more about this tonight, I think we'll realize that actually it's the most human, the most real, the most authentic story of human experience that you can find, and yet the most hopeful and the most encouraging. It's real about our weaknesses, but it doesn't leave us there. And we'll talk a wee bit about that tonight. And we should expect that to be the case if it's true.
That's great, thank you. And I think we have just one more, because I think we've actually, Larry, you covered that, the one if humans are equal. So the last one we have is, if men and women have different roles that work together to bring glory to God, then why are they only allowed in the home and not in the church?
Oh, this is, am I on mute? No. This is one of those times when I really wish I could actually talk to the person, because I've just had a question of clarification about the question. So I'm just going to have to answer it based on what I'm assuming about it. That when it says that they are only allowed in the home and not in the church, I'm guessing that that's meaning that. Actually, maybe Gareth or Kate, could you maybe just help me to make sure I'm understanding this question? I want to make sure I answer the right one. That the roles are only allowed in the home, as in women can lead in the home but not in the church. Is that maybe, do you think what it's meaning? I just want to make sure I've understood. Gareth, do you have, or I don't know if the person themselves wants to just explain.
Yeah, I think it's mostly probably talking about like women's roles are, engaged in domestic affairs. Kind of like
right. Oh, got you.
serious work of like the church stuff is.
Yes. Right. Okay. Well, yeah. Firstly, I mean, I think again, this is my understanding of how God works with us, and how I understand like I was saying, with how the Bible works, is I think that we are all on a journey of discovery of what it really means to be truly human the way God created us to be, and to really know him and live out our lives in a way that he's called us to. And his disciples all the way along were getting things wrong, misunderstanding that. And it was usually around some kind of power dynamic, that they were kind of thinking, I'm going to be sitting next to Jesus on his right and his left. And Jesus is like, you've missed the whole point. And they're always trying to kind of like get ahead in the world's eyes of what it means to be in charge and everything. And Jesus says, no, it's about service. And true power in Christianity is to serve. And that's what God came to show us himself. He's the most powerful being in the world, and yet he came to serve us. And that's how Jesus lived. So that dynamic is going on, but yet we struggle so much with that. I think one of the ways in which the church has got this wrong, and we're still growing in this, is that dynamic of who's in charge, and it's kind of like an ungodly dynamic, is still something we struggle with in the church, and because we just naturally have that, like, I want to be in charge dynamic, kind of interpretation. We read certain texts and we interpret them to be like that. And so I think women really have been kept out of leadership in the way that they really should be in the church, because with that lens, we've read the text, but that's so not the heart of God. And if you look at all the way through in the early church, I said we didn't have time in my talk to talk about this, but Junia, for example, most theologians kind of agree now. There are one or two who think that could be a male name, but Junia is most likely. There's no other examples in that time of that name being male, and we're told that Junia was an apostle. Phoebe, we're told, as I said, was called the title, well, a deacon, but diaconon, which is the exact same title that Timothy and Paul used for their own ministries. And we know that Phoebe would have been reading the letter of Romans in that kind of home church context, and that would have been a leadership role. Ken Bailey similarly says, even today, where when people are looking for kind of like to look for the head of kind of like revolutionary groups, women are never considered, because today, even in the Middle East, often women aren't in leadership. But it's interesting that the book of Acts clearly tells us that women, when Paul was trying to seek out who was kind of this rebel Christian group and was persecuting them, women were dragged into the streets with the men. And even like the best cultural analysis tells us that must have been because they were like leaders of the movement. If you just read the chapter 16 of the book of Romans, you see all the women that Paul is affirming. And I think however specifics you want to talk about roles, clearly the Bible has made we can see that men and women are different. But what's interesting is the Bible never gives a prescribed list of characteristics of what it means to be woman, or characteristics of what it means to be a man. Sometimes like the book of Proverbs talks about this particular woman as a godly woman, but actually if you read that one, it's interesting. She's like running an international business. She's kind of like in charge of everything, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, she's like running the city and she's so amazing, and her husband's just like, she's epic, and her kids are, she's epic. So basically these are the lists we're given, but we're never given a definitive list of every man, if they're a godly man, should be da 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 da. And I kind of love that, because God isn't controlling, and there's things that we're told like men have a maleness about them, but men can love ballet, men can be incredible artists, and all these stereotypes that we put on, the Bible never puts those on. And women, similarly, can be incredibly powerful. And actually, the Bible shows that. Esther standing up and like saving the whole nation, and Deborah leading the charge. And actually, it's culture that creates the boundaries. But it's so obvious. Women have such a variety of gifts, and men have a variety of gifts. And what it means to be a godly woman is to love God and be humble and servant-hearted in the personality and the gifts that I've been given. Similarly for a man. So I think it's with our stereotyping lenses, which often come with, I want power and I want to kind of control things, that we often interpret text and then bring that into our churches. And I think it's so exciting to look at Jesus and look at the early church and say, wow, what does it look like for us to actually live out this radical valuing of the other, especially people who've been oppressed in the past, and see, I wonder, wow, let's listen to their voices. What do they have to say? So it's a big picture answer, but I hope it gives something of what I think God's heart is on this.
Thank you so much. That's so helpful, and you've really helped us understand this. There's a wee question here. Will I read this out? Is it? Hey Lara, just in regards to having friends that are Catholic and are gay, would you say it's okay to celebrate Pride with them, even though you've made it clear you're against Pride? Would you be representing Jesus by celebrating it with them to show unconditional love and grace, or would that be contradictory? It's a great question.
Okay. Can I just check, Kate, are we good for time? How much time do I need to?
I think the people who have had class have gone on, actually.
Okay.
So,
we can hang out. Thank you so much for this question. I might say a little bit on it, and then Gareth, if you also want to, I don't know, add some thoughts. Thank you for this question. I think it's such an important question, and maybe I've got two thoughts in my mind. The first is that I think that the Bible makes it incredibly clear that we are always called to show love and deep respect to our fellow human beings, and that is whatever view we have, and there can be even a variety of different views. I know different people have different theological convictions about Catholicism and about sexuality, but the Bible says whatever different view that person has to us, we are called to show the deepest level of respect and love and welcome, and that we don't have to agree in terms of our ideas or our theology to have that kind of friendship and that kind of and to really spend that time getting to know one another and loving each other. I mean, Jesus, that's one of the most important things. Jesus hung out with people who had a whole bunch of different ethics and values to him, and he spent time and he loved them and he valued them. So that is, and often to the shock and horror of the religious people. But so that's, to me, incredibly clear in the Bible. And I think then in practice, we just need to pray for wisdom. What does that look like in this context? I think in different contexts, things can look really, really different. Even if I think about Jesus, how Jesus gave such different answers to different people. To some people who came, it's interesting, he was really kind of like forthright and challenging. To other people, he wasn't at all. He just asked gentle questions or just spoke about God's love to them. And there was just a kind of a wisdom and I think all of us that, I would say my non-Christian friends would have a similar approach to this. Whoever we're talking to, that depending on that person, where they're at in their life, what personality type they have, they might kind of really want a really robust conversation about things. Other people, that's not where they're at all. And in fact, that would actually be really hurtful to them. And they actually just need a cup of tea, and for us to just ask about their life and maybe come along to an event with them that they mean something to them, even if we don't agree with it. And yet they're saying, please, it would mean a lot to me. Would you come along and would you hear about it? And it might feel like actually wisdom in that sense is like, actually, that's what this friendship really is needing for me to express love. In another context, that might not be what's wise. I think those practical questions are something that basically there's a yes and a no, depending on what the situation is, what's wise and truly loving in the situation. But what I actually love is I do think that the Bible gives us a whole lot of freedom, because as Christians, there can be a thing that is basically saying, in all scenarios, I need to just back away and kind of cocoon myself to only hang around in kind of spheres where I think all the ethics that I believe in are being practiced. That's what I see Jesus doing. If God had thought that way, he would have stayed in heaven. He came into this sphere and he interacted and he came really up close to a whole bunch of different ethics to his ethics. And yet he was like loving and had friendships with those people. But there might be wisdom for us. For example, if you have a certain set of ethics, and actually going into a scenario at that time is really tempting to how you want to live and for what you really believe is right, that might not be wise. And I'm sure your friend would understand if you then said, look, I can't come along to this event because actually it's tempting for me, or it's confusing for me at this time, but I just want to say I love you, and I really want to be your friend. So that might be wise. So I hope you understand what I'm saying, that there's an ethic of the Bible that says, like, we're called to engage and not be afraid of difference, and to know God, and to go deeper in our own discipleship of what it means to follow Jesus. But that doesn't mean we should keep totally separate from the world. Jesus says, don't be of the world. Don't just follow Jesus. So be different, be of Jesus, be a disciple of Christ, but be in the world, be interacting, be loving, be learning even. So yeah, get very passionate about this question. I know I didn't give a specific answer, but I hope you heard it's because I actually think there's probably principles to follow that mean that in different contexts there would be maybe a different answer that would be wise.
That's so great, Lara. Thank you. I think that's all of the questions that we have. Is that yeah? That's them all, Jasmine. Thank you so much, Lara and Gareth. That was so great, and thank you so much for everyone who asked questions. And there's an opportunity to ask further questions. In the chat, there's a little follow-up link. So this is just a little form. There's a little question in it to say if you have any more questions. There's an opportunity to give contact details if you want to, or you can message our page, or come tonight. There's another opportunity for Slido. The Eventbrite link is in the chat as well. Gareth is going to be there tonight, and Lara is going to be back on Thursday. So Thursday, same time at 1 p.m. on Zoom, and Lara is asking the question, why is the church so full of hypocrites? So another tough question, Lara. And tomorrow we have another lunch bar as well with Gareth. So Jasmine's got some lovely graphics here. So these are lunch bars. Tomorrow we have why does real happiness always seem out of reach? And then Lara's question on Thursday. And then all our evening events are, if you click the Eventbrite link, you'll see all of those there. And they're all live streamed. This is what's happening tomorrow. Tomorrow is a change of a location. So tonight is Ravenhill, tomorrow is Stranmillis EPC. But thank you so much for coming. Thanks for giving up your lunchtime. Thank you so much, Lara and Gareth, again. And yeah, I hope to see some of you tonight. And yeah, you're free to go.